No matter the time, no matter the place, the collective consciousness of man is the safe harbor in which to dock. Tie up here and see the world through a knothole. When it comes to asking him, local conditions will most often say, "Don't ask me." For those of you keeping rabbits in score, you might care to note that once you get on certain speaking terms with life, it's not really a matter of having to ask questions. Everything you want to know, life's already talking about all the time. Our science news for the day. All ordinary thoughts are composed of 4 common particles, and 2 of them are yet to be discovered. If you find the above to make no sense, you may be a scientist, or some other sort who thinks using only 4 particles, all of which unknown, and 2 yet to be discovered. I was doing that for the sake of many of you who thought you were about to have another small tumor. Just those swift kind that just go through the system. You know. See, ordinary, simple-minded people, they call them headaches. They linger. But the reason routine minds do so favor logic is because that's about all that makes any sense to them. Finding, if 2 and 2 did not equal 4, man would have to invent that it does. Not many theological students in the crowd. Just as being well would be a miracle to the sick, and being smart would be a miracle to the stupid, so too is nothing a miracle to a man who knows what's going on. What is the difference between life and reality? Life is life, and reality man's commentary thereon. A tip for appearing in public. If you're not certain your victory has any real value, always stand and raise your arms high. While hormones devour their achievements, neurons put theirs in display cases. As he adjusted his catcher's mitt, the player thought, if I could develop fresh neural connections as thick as my wrist, I might be in a whole new ball game. It's difficult for the ordinary to have any creative talent and not become critical, sarcastic, or overcome by a sense of irony. To march in a mass parade whilst personally hearing music played at double tempo can prove quite vexing to the unenlightened. A man's mental life is a private affair. Yes, in the same sense that a flock's dung output belongs to all sheep equally. And several cows said, well, thank God they're laying off of us for a while. Okay then, Mr. Smarty Rancher, tell me this. What is the difference between a flock of sheep, a herd of cows, and a group of men? Ha ha! If it took you longer than a nanosecond to answer, then there is your answer. Leastwise in your case. A new myth. Once upon a time, long, long ago, before things were permanently divided into the few searching for the secret, and then everybody else, life one day enlightened everyone. But as it turned out, only the few who would end up inescapably working for it anyway were pleased by it. Everybody else just went, ho hum, so what? So you can see how things turned out to be as they are now. By the way, when I said a new myth, we're talking about 30 seconds old. It's very seldom you see handwritten myths anymore. The mystical traveling ball player's motto, keep your eye on the throttle. The only way a man can justifiably be critical of stupidity is to have complaints with his mother. Men developed the so-called science of genetics just so they wouldn't have to face the truth. Next verse, men invented the field of psychology so as to appear to have progressed beyond genetics. To help promote his own spirituality, one man changed his name to Refried Mishmash after having already been locally assigned the one of Mishmash Refried. They linked arms, lined up on the runway, and began to sing, "Someday I'll soar, someday I'll fly." But none ever removed the mental parking blocks from beneath their wheels. Somehow it's just, even though I do it, it's hard to imagine that putting in little cheap theatrics is actually going to help transcendental information. But who knows? I mean, after all, I have seen some cave drawings not commonly available in your major publications of Buddha going. Well, it was similar to that. If you looked at it just the right way, it got a little... It looks sort of like that. Let's leave it. When local conditions say to ordinary minds, "Hey, wait on me," it's probably just to make them feel good. Before considering further the possibility of placing himself under arrest, the man asked himself, "Why would a person with your talent and potential be a party to this felonious mechanical babble?" And is so often the case. He wanted to explain how the influences of others had caused him to act so. A mystical sports broadcasting director's tip: don't run replays. A man wrote the info doctor, "Dear doctor, is there something in man that makes him lash out hormonally in response to problems that are neural in nature?" And the doctor held the letter out at arm's length and looked at it real close and said, "Are you nuts?" Clutching and the less complex. The simple try to hold on to what they've got. And if you believe that you've got the thoughts that pass through you, then you're definitely one of them. From a legal view, the question of possession can be quite tricky, and how much more so from a mental one. Many a mystical school has described its intent as one of liberation, a freedom from something or the other. And the alert of eye have always recognized this to be a newly won freedom from the illusion of personal mental possessions. Only consciousness is individual. Only consciousness community property. Thus are simple minds local and the more conscious universal. A man compiled a list of the most revered quotations from history's wise men, and after looking it over carefully said, "What a bunch of chumps." And his brother noted, "That's a pretty harsh thing to say." And the man replied, "Oh, I didn't mean while they were alive." The title of that news item was, "The Impact of Time. Like it or lump it, or understand its workings." The ordinary always want to overdo the battle. After life created everything, it told local conditions that they were in charge. Of course, it could have just been to make them feel good. How easily things can go uncomprehended if you're a creature with a mind. As he looked through his telescope, the astronomer thought, "Does anyone really understand the workings of the human intestines?" The benefit of being the dumbest man alive. You don't have anything to ever feel worse about. And now for your dining and shopping pleasure, this fine definition. Guilt, the thing had by those who don't know how to fully enjoy their dumbness. The benefit of being original is that you never have anyone else to blame. And now another chapter in our continuing series, what this kind of thing is sort of like. This kind of thing is sort of like a commercial you see on TV that at first seems interesting, even entertaining, but when it's over, you're not sure what it was they were selling. The experience of higher consciousness and the art of joke telling. The awakening. A punchline for which there is no adequate setup. One aspect of hormones fully and plainly explained. as per one man's observation. Observation's he. The only reason to ever get mad is when you're pissed already. And if that don't just about cover it, we're all a bunch of unmade beds. How could I read them any slower? Trying to become more conscious while living on earth is like trying to add a third sound to a watch's tick-tock, tick-tock. And a man standing alone out by a private launching pad saying to himself, "The power of gravity is far too grave for me to have a last line to this song." A mythical warrior so advised his son. The problem with attacking the crippled is that it keeps them upright. And by the way, any of you out there who try and apply such a notion to your thinking, do so at your own risk. Don't blame me. At a less direct operational level, engaging in gossip is a way to talk about yourself without it being so obvious. 'Tis alleged that a more conscious man would only have two occasions in life to even talk about himself personally. One would be when he says that he has no explanation or excuse to offer, and the other would be when he points out that he died yesterday. And a man pondered into himself, if Attila the Hun is hormones and Pliny the Elder neurons, then where does Hannibal and all of his elephants fit in? History, an area of interest to the pseudo-sophisticated after they become reluctant to publicly engage in gossip. But could not the same be said of all of man's social sciences? One matter at a time, if you don't mind. And now a local human interest story. Downtown this morning, two men were talking, and the first one said, "Just as to the body food would be the one invariable, so too to the mind should not words be the one reliable constant?" And the second man replied, "You'll have to tell me exactly what you mean by reliable constant." Okay, you got me. It didn't actually occur.
No.
Well, at least downtown, between two people. The sport of trying to become more conscious, a merry-go-round without end. And here finally a clear civil definition of irony. Irony. A rather restricted sense of comprehension. I said civil. Quiz time. Is the original ever serious? No. Is the original ever dangerous? No. Is the original ever antagonistic? No. Is the original ever popular? No. Is it ever even actually visible? Not to the simple, it's not. And with no prodding on my part, one man immediately realized that he could use these questions to help him determine his own degree of originality. For life to become reality, man has to think. And for man's thinking life to become a full reality, he has to be conscious. Livers are livers and spleens are spleens, but this is the strangest case that I've seen. The simple will defend their mental territory with as much ferocity as will a deranged moose their physical. And now some hunting news. How come it's so hard to bag a mystic? Because you don't know where they live and you don't know what they look like. Aha! So is that why you never hear of the enlightened shooting themselves out of season? A man looked skeptically at his mind and said, "We're not going anywhere together till I'm convinced you'll fit on my fender." Standing nose to nose with life, one man declared, "I may be down, but I'm not out." And life began rolling it around in his mouth. Out. Out. What a curious notion. A mystical outline said to a more conscious content, if you don't oppose or attack something else, how can you tell that you actually exist? Okay, which of you contestants would like to try that one? Only that which is original can be taken personally. Well, I say, then does that explain why? Yes, it does. The difference between mere thinkers and the more conscious is that the latter do not deal in theories. A mystic's growing guide. Germinate, originate. The experience of higher consciousness and the art of joke-telling, part 2. The enlightenment, life's ultimate punchline. Who watches what? The simple watch life, the more complex watch themselves watching life, the more conscious watch me write this stuff. Then go off and germinate and originate. We be still talking about the non-linear progression of neural activity that you people held me down, tickled me, and beat me, and made me go ahead and agree to call literal, metaphorical, and symbolic. Yeah, it wasn't so funny when it happened to you. There was a harsher comeback for that one, but I withheld. That brand new instant myth I wrote tonight was in consideration of us stepping into the area of symbolic thinking. See, everyone thinks literally. Again, for those people who just showed up, when I say everybody, I'm only talking about the middle class, square, ordinary, decent, civilized people of the world. Not the fringes, not those baffled, not those deranged, just the ordinary people in the world. They think literally. That is the minimum requirement that can be seen as the end of the first chapter of every people's creation myth, that man is sent out thinking, sent away from some previous childlike, simple paradise into this harsh, harsh world, whereas they try to, ordinary people then later literally translate it that they were sent from a garden of paradise and tranquility. They were sent into this harsh world, and the harsh world they like to describe through real complex and metaphysical descriptions like, oh my God, I got to work for a living? That's not it, but that's about the best they can do with it. I stole that one from the Old Testament in case anybody wants to write me. But it's always the stories of the gods. And somebody says, get out of here, which is not a hell of a lot different than an eagle throwing a chick out of the nest finally, and get away from me, or quit suckling, go off on your own. But it's not simply seeing out man as a curse. It's once man begins to think, he doesn't need another curse. Which is another myth, but I don't have to write it because you be living it. He is sent out thinking, but the thinking is literal. That is the bare minimum. That is like learning, to draw another parallel, it's like learning the alphabet before you can actually speak, which is not true, but we got to say something. Everyone thinks literally. You've got to do that. That is, in a sense, the curse. That is what drives, we'll assume, all people like you, that in somewhere along the way you thought you were searching for something. It put you off on a slightly askew, or at least oblique, internal course, the likes of which I have described allegorically on many an occasion, of what you've gone through of searching out religious tomes, religious people, philosophers, etc., wise uncles and aunts, and talking to people. What you're attempting to escape from, and escape is a decent description, it has been proven to be historically decent. That is, it continues, as I pointed out in one of the news items tonight, that mystical schools have been wont continually to describe what their intention is and what they're up to as being some form of liberation, freedom from something. The more simple-minded then take it to be freedom from, as it's called in religious circles, normally evil, which all they mean is freedom from death. They just can't stand the thought. Simple people, you ask them, what's the worst thing in the world could happen? Would it be telling a lie against a decent public official? We won't go into that. No. Would it be cheating on your income tax when our government in its wisdom has given more leeway to operate on a responsible honor system? Would it be to actually flinch money out of the charity box in the foyer of the church? No. All that's just fooling around. To simple-minded people, there's only one evil. I'm going to die too? Then they try to cover it up because it's similar to when I point out about gossip. About gossip and how that was actually a cover about talking to yourself. And at the end of the page, I did another one, gave a definition of history. That history is that which the pseudo-sophisticated fall into once they become sort of ashamed to actually gossip in public. And so you call it history and it sounds better. People are ashamed once they're pseudo-sophisticated. If you say, well, you're a grown man, you can't go around weeping and moaning like that over the fact that you're going to die. Everybody's going to die. You knew that since you were a kid. And they have to sort of buckle up. And so then they have to hide it. And nobody admits that they're afraid to die, the simple-minded. Then it becomes, I fear living a life not properly reflective and introspective. I fear that I have lived a life in vain, that I did not serve my fellow man. Or if you're a little more simple, I fear that I have lived a life and offended the gods, or at least not pleased them, which is all to say, I'm going to die too? That's literal thinking. But beyond that, what I'm saying is those that go off that are driven with this itch for a kind of, as it's been called, an enlightenment, an awakening of consciousness at another level, has also been described as a kind of liberation. And then it gets into liberation from, I'm talking now beyond the simple, literal man's interpretation of it later. But even those that second, third generation, let us say, from mystical schools or of mystical activities, they still are very inspecific, as they should be, but they are still inspecific as to liberation of what? And I can tell you quite literally what it is. Liberation from literal thinking. Oh, okay. That is what the desire is based on. The next step, as I was putting it, even though it was non-linear, would be a kind of metaphorical thinking. That is, you begin to do for the first time in your life anything resembling, or something resembling a kind of personal interpretation, almost a personal ability to think. It is certainly not the final word, and it is certainly not the sort of thing that people do at a continuing tempo. But it is taking what ordinarily goes on in life, what is, in a sense, if you recall the one that I drew, if you looked at it as being what seems to be reality to ordinary people, and they're sitting here on the floor of a theater in their little seat, that would be literal thinking. And then metaphorical thinking would be if there was another balcony, or a balcony, whereas the metaphorical would be another view, and although would be weekend mystics, of course, love to hear the idea of higher degrees and that they're all better people and that they're more awake and they're more enlightened. If you insist, all right, it's up to you. But what it is the ability to stand right there with no turban on your head, not sitting out nude in the snow in Tibet, that you can stand right here in the middle of Detroit, Michigan, and watch ordinary life go by. What you're watching is not necessarily life go by. I tried to up the stakes a bit more surreptitiously upon you, but it's no longer going to be surreptitiously if you're going to blabber it out. Okay. It's not actually watching life. I ought to call that screen reality. Because life is one thing. What men ordinarily call life is the running mental commentary thereon, which is reality, which is what I was trying to get you to see last time, that any discussion, which will again assume that all of you are beyond the grips of terminal philosophizing, If so, go home and take that photograph you have of Pliny the Elder. Wear it as some sort of solstice on your chest, but put his picture face down. Well, it'll come to you. You'll see. But still, any notion about what is reality, it is of no consequence. Because all it is each person's literal, mental commentary on life. And any discussion, any debate as to whose is better than anybody else's is simply a manifestation of those desperate for a hobby. Probably somebody stole their glove, they can't play, they won't even let them play in Little League, and they are desperate for a hobby. The commentary, though, you have to remember this, the running commentary is literal. You're born with it, and then any idea that you weren't born with it is just a distraction. You're just wasting your time. You were born sane. The ability to literally think is the kind of comfort, it is the opening salvo tonight that said, no matter the time, no matter the place, the collective consciousness of man is a safe harbor in which to dock. It is the sanity. It is where you belong. If you're ordinary, it's where you had to be to get this far. That there's no room for criticism. There is nothing to be said about literal thought. Nothing. It just is. The metaphorical would be the closest you would come to anything resembling individual. And I say resembling because it gets into the area where we're going to finally have to move up to the other balcony of the symbolic. Because the metaphorical I was using in my description of literal being simply the mind apparently means exactly what it says. That guy is fat. That guy is tall. That woman is short. Those people are richer than me. Whatever it is, are there by God as a DeSoto. Well, it's Detroit. I was trying to throw in a little automotive humor, but metaphorical thinking is meaning something other than you think. Symbolic is then where you eat them both alive, in a sense, because it is you think what you think, and then you think something else entirely different. Symbolic thinking is getting right at the edge of, say I drew him up to the top of the theater. The top of the theater would be something, that would be original thought. Original thought, you've got to understand, is far removed from the safety of collective consciousness. I remind you again, we're talking about, when I say collective consciousness, ordinary people. And vis-a-vis ordinary people, the kind of originality of thought has nothing to do with external, with visible rebellion. I know we've been through it, but let me point out again, it's got nothing to do with you sticking out your tongue at the world, with you making fun of the middle class, of ordinary people. Originality of thought has a whole handful of descriptions I could use that would be applicable to us, the people involved with this. That originality of thought is never critical. Originality of thought is not dangerous, it's not antagonistic. That was the first three I included in tonight's news item. And I even point out that a man later, after hearing this, with no prodding from you or I, on his own, realized, hey, I could use those same questions. You remember it was presented as questions. It said, is originality ever critical? No. Is originality ever dangerous? No. Is originality ever antagonistic? No. Is originality ever but the first three. And then a guy realized, wait, I could use that to determine my own degree of originality, which of course you've got to judge your own degree of originality, etc. But still, it had a purpose or I would not have included that guy. Originality of thought is never critical. That alone, if I was making up Zen stories, I would make up one. I'd have drug it out, I guess, a little bit further. This wise old Zen master, and we're talking, at least I would infer it was probably around the 1200s or at least 1956, and that there was some student had been working on all the Cohens and the other people in the neighborhood and he was working on trying to unsolve the riddle, and and that one day the master called him in and he says, you show some promise, But let me tell you one thing. Originality of thought is never critical. And the student started to make some reply to it, which was some counter to it, you understand? And as soon as he did, he went, ooh! How does Homer go? Well, he had the enlightenment because he understood, wait a minute, I was about to be critical of that. It would be, you understand why I did that? No, it's all right. It's... Well, it is a kind of continuing reminder if you need it. You do not need a hair shirt. You do not need to carry around an ugly picture of whoever the present pope or head rabbi is to look at and remind you. All you got to do is realize anytime you're feeling critical, anytime, since I use hormones and neurons sometimes, anytime you're thinking critical. I know you normally say you feel critical, but we've been through this. Where do thoughts originate? Don't forget that now. Overeating. Okay. Well, just you can't get them confused now. So that's why I stopped and I said, anytime you feel critical, and I said, nah, anytime you think critical. But having thought about that, we'll go back to anytime you feel critical, you can be aware of the fact, you don't have to make sure you still got that rock in your shoe to help remind you to be alert, be more conscious. You do not have to curse the hair shirt again. All you got to do is be aware of the fact that anything critical that passes through your, what you call it, whatever you call it, anything critical passes through there, realize this. No conditions, no second question involved, no doubt whatsoever. You are thinking literally. You are back on the floor of the theater. You could not go any lower unless some way you managed to crawl down under the seat in which you were born. In other words, you cannot do any worse. If you tried, which is another, you can do another story on that. Here it is. This time that's the mid-1300s or 1974. This Zen master calls in this young student who had been showing some promise again and says, here it is, I've seen that you have worked on all the tasks I've given. You've brought in the water and you've fixed the fires and you've done everything. But now I've got the real one. It's just for you. I'm not going to tell anybody else. Here is your new task. I want you to do mentally your worst. I want you to be as unconscious. I want you to be as unalert. I want you to be as dense, as torpid, as absolutely possible. Constantly. And don't tell anyone. Don't. But you do it. How long do you think it took him to go, ah? So I gave you a range, 1300s to 1900s. You cannot do any worse than think literally. And if you think literally, you've got to remember also that I said there's not good or bad, so there is no worse. Originality of thought is never critical. There is no way that you can be thinking, you can be mentally aware in any way that's more conscious that has any critical element to it. If the intent for some reason was to try and set up right now verbally establish the basis of some mystical school, there it is. Try it. We'll be sure and have a very large campus because you will be absolutely swamped by probably 1 or 1.5 people might show up. If you say, here it is, just remember that anytime you are thinking critically at all, you couldn't do worse. There it is. There's the beginning and the end of it. And you would hear this 1.5 people out there on the edge of your campus cheering and going, well, let me in. How much is tuition? Where can I join? Of course, at least half of that would-be student population would probably balk when they find out that school was year-round anyway. So you're down to what? 0.75 of one student? Originality of thought could literally have been described in the past, which has never been that you've ever heard of, as the workable method, discipline, approach of some mystical school. I would suggest to any of you who are interested as to why it never occurred, as we've already noted on several occasions, the talking of the idea of being more conscious as being strictly a mental activity, it's not unknown, but it is never had anything approaching popularity even amongst Western mystics. About the most that's come out, and this is no consequence, but just any of you who happen to have read enough, would be probably the English translation of Zen activity, and that the purpose being the liberation, the calming of the mind into such a way that it then begins to reflect unadulterated reality, which would be life with no commentary, or some of the ideas of more northern Buddhist offshoots of the liberation of the mind, the liberation of thought. And yet, again, there's no great consequence, but everybody seems to enjoy that kind of gossip. They did not even intend it at that time, that specifically mentally. The mind, then and even now amongst the would-be mystics, still has a rather vague, shall we say, why not, vague and not literal usage. The mind to people still, even those that would believe that they're interested in such activities, whatever this is, they would still, when they hear and read, when they hear the idea of the mind, they still take it to be something having to do with do your own background music of ooh, the spirit, the soul. If you try to say, no, we're talking about the brain, right? The brain. There's nothing to look for. Don't go dissect Buddhist's great-great-grandson looking for a man's heart, for his soul, for his spirit. This is what you're looking for. This is where it is. It is too mundane. It is too gross, in the physiological sense, to be of any interest to the genteel, highly sophisticated sort who would be mystics, who would join. It is far too gross, too crude, too common. And again, life protects itself. And I might point out, not unlike some insurance companies, at your expense. Of course, if you don't like it, you know what you can do. No, you don't have to commit suicide. In case that's what you thought. When I said, you know what you can do, you're supposed to go, yeah, I know what I can do. I'll pretend you didn't say that. Well, hear it and go, ho hum, so what? That's the way you handle that, see. Originality of thought would be a more active version of the kind of meditation techniques as presented in English translations of Zen exercises, amongst others. But a calming of the mind. What they are attempting to do in sort of a sideways approach, it's a different time, different place, but would be the idea of meditation and the idea that is used of some drugs, but begin to something based upon a little more pragmatic operation would be, well, sans drugs, like the idea of meditation, the sitting, the zazen forever until just one day, if you're lucky, that's like the mind suddenly shuts up and it's Buddhahood, Buddha brain. The idea, the description is fair. I've given the general one that they used to use. It is the calming of the mind in the same way that the little ripples on top of a lake might finally be stilled, and instead of you seeing this fragmented, if you look down the lake and it's always rippling, say you're trying to see the sky, the sun, and it's always just broken up into little factious pieces. And you're never quite sure. It looks like it's yellow, but you can't put it all together. But then if it stops, then you've got a perfect reflection of the sun, that is your mind then perfectly, without any interference about your own, which the translation seems to infer that whatever you're doing, whatever the interference is your personal responsibility. Yeah. That is, it's your mind doing it. And so your mind, if it does finally reach that calm state, then Satori is a reality, then enlightenment is possible because your mind then perfectly reflects life. Not your interpretation, which is another way of saying that they have in some way either stopped, superseded, overcome literal thinking. Me describing it as originality of thought is it's not a correction of it, it's not better or worse. It's just a different, alive description and having to do with specifically with the active operation of the mind, unless you want to go and sit forever. It is, in a sense, never thinking, refusing to think, which those of you that like non sequiturs in camouflage. Non sequiturs on acid and drag on motorcycles. There's a new group we were trying to work up, but somebody had already taken part of the name. Non sequiturs undercover is to say, absolutely refuse to think anything anybody else thinks. The only thing could be more non sequiturized than that would be somebody go, can you hold it a second while I write that down? Okay, refuse to write down anything anybody ever says. Wait a minute, you're going too fast. All right, don't ever do gestures that have anything to do with your forehead. See, originality has something to do with surprise. Those of you that continue to think it was crude, as I tried to be very sincere when I was describing how the nervous system works up. When it gets up, somebody's getting too sharp. I was going to do it again. I guess I don't spend enough time on the build-up sometimes to really try and lull you into some sense of I'm being serious and going along. But it's a thing of trying to build up this kind of pressure, this kind of power through the chakras of the human nervous system, to build it up through the serpent and the dragon and the mystical warrior, and to get it all the way up into here, and to go, God, it's so great to be able to do these kind of gestures from your forehead. It seems impressive, even if you don't understand anything, to go, ah! Because the unexpected is almost synonymous with originality, except it's not, but it almost is. Yeah. Okay. I guess we've about kicked the air out of that old soccer ball. Which, in the beginning, I didn't actually picture it personally. Nobody asked me as a soccer ball. I picture it more as being your head. But either way, there seemed to be a certain resiliency has been lost. Perhaps through metaphysical redundancy. But we'll have to check with the referee later on that. That's not my call. I do not have a whistle. I just thought of one, though. a poor man's referee. Offsides. Oh. The ordinary always want to overdo the battle. The ordinary always want to overthink the battle. The ordinary always want to overimagine the struggle. That in conjunction with the idea of liberation, that all of it is some form to escape from something, a freedom from something. And everything from the cruder forms of mysticism is reflected in the so-called mystical aspects or arms of all the world's major religions, into those that apparently are more specifically involved with individual activities such as meditation, the Zen schools, the Sufi schools, etc. The liberation, as I said, from one quite specific electrochemical area can be seen as the attempt to escape from the limits of simply literal thinking. That it can be called every fine thing in the world. It can be called liberation from illusion, from delusion, which sounds worse in English. Delusion. I mean, it's bad enough to be under the influence of illusion. But delusion, I mean, it's the harsh sound. Delusion. I notice in the West they named the old guy the devil. They didn't name him something like Elmer or Avery. The liberation, well, any of you who ever think about it, sometimes there's some movement afoot for me not to be so cute and clever and make everybody laugh. But when there's nothing to talk about, what are you going to do but make it sound funny? I mean, if you say, all right, here's the main thing about transferring information as to far as what life is about. Because rather than make it personally, then I have to make up a story. There is a myth that says that those who know what is going on in life, those who actually know the secret, cannot tell directly what it is. Therefore, all they can say is, I can't tell you what it is. And everybody settles down like, well, now we're getting somewhere. Now I'm prepared for the long haul, and I make sure they got plenty of paper and sharp pencils. And even the person talking, part of the same dance, has to say, well, as far as the secret itself, as far as what life is actually doing, what's going on right here, what you're a part of, I can't tell you. Dash. Or if you're going to nitpick, perhaps even a comma, or, for all I know, a semicolon. I can't tell you directly what it is, and everybody knows. They're going to go, but you might consider this. And everybody gets ready to write. If there is nothing to be said, and you know it, now it doesn't count if you don't know it, because then, that's why I've tried to point out, is one way to tell that that somebody does know what's going on. But there are several ways. Of course, if you have that kind of internal collective dung output for all the different herds and flocks on this planet, then you don't really need this kind of individual apparatus. But as I pointed out several times, there are ways to tell when somebody doesn't know what they're talking about. The two main ones is, first off, they're dead serious. Which those many people, because you would think to begin with, that wait a minute, if there's something, this kind of thing, I'm playing another part, you understand. That's when I point like that. That is not the same as this. This is that. Or from the other view, that is this. You would think, would you not, that beyond the area of learning how to pull a transmission or to clean out gutters, that if it was something having to do with matters transcendental, matters of a mystical nature, that amongst everything, that above everything else, would have to be serious in nature. And that just seems to be self-evident. It seems to be so self-evident that no one even bothers to ever point it out. It would have to be on the contrary that seems to be going in another direction. But consider why I'm telling you that is one of the two. It is the first one. I would name that as number one. Yeah, I would. I just wanted to be sure that I was telling you the truth, give you the right mathematical order, and yes. Number one, you can be sure that someone does not know what they're talking about when they're serious. That doesn't prove, by the way, that if they're not serious, that they know what they're talking about, because we got comedy clubs. For a while, I thought they were going to catch up with a number of churches and synagogues, but no. It seemed like their days passed, and now they're closing up as fast as they can. So, but a man can hope. But someone who says that they know serious information, or they just say, well, listen, I know what it is. God talks to me, or I've went to a mystical school, and they put me through the process, and I not only awoke, I not only became enlightened, but I am now man number 17 on this chart that I have that they gave me, that, I have it here, and I have credentials I studied with so-and-so. And you think, well, that's what I'm looking for. Somebody knows what's going on and will admit it and has credentials. But if it's serious, they don't know what's going on. But then back to what I said, that you, I assume, called the humor, I said, but just because a man is not serious doesn't mean he knows what he's talking about. And everybody understood that. That's why I got into a little side humor about comedy clubs. That if it just because a man was not serious, that proved he knew what he was talking about, then all comedians would be mystics. Not that a whole lot of them don't think they are, but I've described that to you. It has to do with the idea of irony is where it comes from. It's a poor man's attempt to be a little more alert. But back to the fact, just because a man would be funny, it doesn't prove he knows what he's talking about. So then if you followed that kind of dichotomous cul-de-sac, and anybody in urban planning, don't write me and tell me whether that's possible or not. That kind of neural dichotomous cul-de-sac of, all right, if anybody is serious, they don't know what they're talking about. But just because they're not serious doesn't mean they do. And then that leaves you sitting there going, is always like, well, Jesus, what now? There we are again. There is no what now. What am I going to say after that? But the point is, it cannot be serious. But then if you've already said, well, there's nothing I can tell you directly. If the guy was inferring that he knew, we're back to my myth, so we don't take it personal and you think I actually know anything. We're just talking in the third person. That the myth says that if a man actually knows what's going on in life, he knows a secret, he cannot tell you directly. He cannot tell anybody directly what it is. So, and then I went ahead and threw into you that if somebody is serious, they do not know what they're talking about. That is, they don't know the secret. But also, just because they're not serious doesn't mean they do either, comma. And then you're left with, well, what's the next part? And that's the point. There isn't really no next part. Because if all of that's true, what are you left with? But I was going to point out is why this seems to produce a certain degree of laughter. And it's not just because they're jokes, because I assume all of you tried, well, if you haven't, you can go try to take something out that you hear here that makes you laugh and go tell it to some ordinary person as a joke. After you catch their initial reaction, I wouldn't advise you to stick around a long time. Or don't say, wait a minute, I got another one for you. No. Don't push it. Just leave. So, well, maybe I got it wrong. Maybe I got it wrong. And then so I'll get back with you and then leave and don't ever go back. Because they're not funny per se. But if there's nothing you can say about what life is, literally, then what can you say? And in a sense, if you do try to slip it in on people, and you have the right kind of people, it inclines to excite the nervous system in a way that has no normal outlet, the most normal one being, it's kind of the Pee Wee Herman stage of enlightenment before the actual Herman Simpson, I guess. It's kind of the neural nervousness of you're no longer comfortable down here in your literal seat on the floor, and you're not sure you're up in the metaphorical. Of course, in most cases, if you laugh along at this at all, in some way you could say that I have enticed you, I've drugged you, I've hypnotized you, I've tricked you, I've in some way got you floating off the floor in absolute contradistinction to the laws of gravity, and that you now sometimes float above that, to whereas what I'm talking about you know is not what I'm talking about. That's why sometimes I say I'm not actually talking about this. Of course, sometimes I say that when I mean I am talking about it, just for those of you that think you're getting to be real smart. But that is the basis of laughter. That is at the ordinary level, as a matter of fact. I've pointed this out to you before. If you got it, some of you seem to enjoy it or got some from it at the time. That is the nature of laughter, even at the simple level, is the incongruity, the impossibility. And there has to be a certain kind of aggressive edge to it, which turns it into, or vice versa. It's hand in hand of it. All humor having a certain degree, a certain edge of antagonism, because it seems to be based on irony. It seems to be based upon, in the real sense of irony, that things don't go right. Whoever's laughing, whoever makes some sarcastic comment, whoever is the would-be satirist, the lampoonist, that they are saying, well, hey, people talk one game and then they dance another. You know, hey. And so, as opposed to punching somebody in the nose, you punch them in the nose with humor. There's people believing they're punching life in the nose, punching the stupidity, the parochial vision and understanding of people, that they're going to stick them in the eye. When it's working at somewhat a better level, is what I'm pointing out now, is you're no longer stuck to your seat at the literal level, but it cannot be any hostility in the laughter if it's approaching anything worthwhile. Back to where we were 5, 10, 15 minutes ago, that originality of thought is never critical. And conversely, if it is critical, it's not original. And therefore, then I can move one step past that and say you could take it as being a more specific description of how to use the idea of originality of thought. Is simply refuse to think what anybody else thinks, which is impossible on the surface. It's impossible literally, which is why you laughed when I said, if I said don't think about anything that anybody else thinks about, somebody would go, wait a minute, let me write that down. And I say, wait a minute, don't write it down. Let me expand it. Let me cover that. Don't ever write down anything anybody else thinks, because you just heard me say it, so don't write it down. And they go, wait a minute, you're going way too fast. Well, so you laugh, and if we'll assume that there's no hostility in your laughter. The reason you're laughing is it's impossible. I hear it, the sentence makes sense, and yeah, I could have done the same thing, but what are you going to do? There it is. And about all that you're left with is you sort of let some of the pressure off, and you go, ha, ha, ha. But it's kind of the pressure that you find yourself floating almost off the literal floor of the theater. And at first it's I'll use ordinary terms, it's sort of off-putting. It's sort of nerve-wracking. Or it's like being up the first time in a small plane, a two-seater. And the pilot looks like a deranged moose who hadn't been laid in about 2 years. Well, you know. It's that, the feeling the first time. To get beyond literal thinking. And again, assuming that you started out as a sane person, that you're not already genetically brain damaged, that you're basically still a sane person. But you sort of begin to float. You listen to stuff like this and you begin sort of thinking and you realize, well, this is not exactly what it's talking about, even though the words sometimes make sense. And again, if you're to the point that we'll assume for the sake of an example that saying you generically, that you that you laugh and there's no hostility, there's no criticism, and that I no longer have to constantly say, now listen, you know we're not laughing about religion or science or other people. I can say that forever, but if you think literally, you know, it doesn't matter what I say. Which is why I point out some of the humor is I've had people will stop me that's seen this show and go, I like the way you say that you're not actually being hostile, but I know what you're really talking about. And then they'll come out with something ungodly like, I know that you're actually trying to expose the international banking conspiracy or, you know, gun running from, you know, Costa Rica or the just ungodly things. But they'll look at me very seriously, especially in Kroger's. I don't know why. I've admitted I don't know why it happens in Kroger so much. I think we'll have to change the Safeway or somewhere. But see, they have hostility in it, and they think there is another message. There's another message, but nothing specific. If you think it is specific, it is critical. And if it's critical, it is unoriginal. If it's unoriginal, it's got nothing to do with this. Except you're thinking literally. I can't tell you that's not. All I can do is say, well, it's not. And you go, yeah, right, yeah. And tune in next time when there'll be no next time. How long have I got to stand here? Oh, good.